Welcome, everyone, to the Beauty and the Surgeon podcast. I'm Amy. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner, and I'm joined today, as always, by Dr. Jason Martin. He's a board-certified plastic and reconstructive surgeon who is currently, as we tend to find ourselves, on trauma call. How you doing, Dr. Martin?
I don't want to be on trauma call anymore.
You're only 2 days in.
I know. I got a couple more days to go.
You do. I feel like this happens all the time. I said it to Nils when he got here to set up, well, Nils, we're on trauma call again. Some of these are some of our best podcasts, though.
They are.
Yeah, like the podcast where I interviewed you was trauma call.
You're slightly distressed, okay? So when you do the interview, you're probably a little more loose. Mm-hmm. And some things come out that are pretty funny.
Yeah.
But what's our topic today?
So just for anyone listening, if you are interested in seeing the video and the slides that go along with this podcast, you can find those on our YouTube channel at Jason Martin MD. We're also on Instagram at Beauty and the Surgeon Podcast. So we do have a few slides. We're mostly, there may not be all that interesting of slides because today we were talking about the Nutritional Therapy Conference that I just attended last week. And I've been dying to tell Dr. Martin about it, but I haven't because I didn't want to ruin it for the podcast.
So basically we have an episode today that I have no idea what happened,
right?
What went on, what was discussed, and I'm going to engage with you and figure that out.
Yes, which is easy to do because it's fun stuff to talk about.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so
So real quick though, just set the ground rules here. Why are we talking about the NTC or the Nutritional Therapy Conference? Why are we talking about that?
So I think it's important that we talk about it because I am a nutritional therapy practitioner, and I think a lot of people who listen might not know what that is. Most people don't need an explanation as to what a plastic surgeon is or does, but a lot of people don't know what a nutritional therapy practitioner does or what we, study or learn about. So I think that in and of itself is going to be super helpful. And I have amazing advice for anyone who's just interested in bettering their health.
Right. And you and I both believe that nutrition is a big part of health. It's a big part of recovery. It's a big part of plastic surgery. It's a big part of everything you do. So we've had multiple episodes on nutrition. And this is basically bringing the data and the science to the forefront. Amy went to a national conference where they talked about all of the new recommendations and discoveries and et cetera, et cetera. So now we're going to get that today condensed down into probably about 45 minutes.
Yes. And I would...
No pressure.
Right. I think it'd be super awesome to hear about. Just in general, if anybody's interested in health and wellness, this is absolutely a podcast you should listen to.
Yeah, this is probably one of the better episodes. Okay, let's get started now. The ground rules also are that I am not a nutritional therapist, and like everyone else, I have somewhat distorted views on nutrition. So you're gonna be patient with me if I ask stupid questions, and also be patient with Nils, even though you can't hear him because he will ask questions too.
I hope he does. Yes. Yeah. So the title or the theme of this year's conference was Thrive. And the very first presentation was from the director of the NTA, Miriam Zacharias. She used to be the personal assistant for the guy who ran Microsoft, Steve Bellis?
No. You mean the CEO of Microsoft,
CEO
not
of
the
Microsoft.
guy. Yeah.
That's kind of the person who's running it.
No, I kept thinking the founder. I'm sorry.
No, not the founder. No.
He's a bald-headed dude.
Yeah, he's 6'7", huge guy.
He's a huge dude, yeah.
So it was really interesting to hear her talk about her time as his personal assistant because, it was an all-encompassing job, right? He's a very high-powered person. He was traveling, getting his schedule together.
Kind of like working for me, Amy.
Kind of like working for you. He also had young kids. And she said that she was always amazed by his ability to kind of
compartmentalize.
No, shift. He didn't miss a single of his kids' events. He didn't miss dinners at home. He was very focused on quality of life. And that was something that she really learned from him, how to take a page from his book, essentially. And one of the main things that she talked about was the difference between survival and thriving. Thriving is an action word. You can't be thriving and standing still or not making progress or moving or growing. Nothing that's thriving is static. So that thriving is really like an action. So it was really cool. So she was very interesting to hear speak. And that was really kind of her opening thing.
Okay.
Was good. The very first presentation was amazing. It was a woman named Chamonix Janine. Chamonix. She's a PhD. The title of her presentation was Energy to Thrive, How Mind, Body, and Biofield Science Put Our Healing Back in Our Hands. And her website, if anybody's interested, I do have the websites and handles for everybody listed. It was her name, which is SHAMINIJAIN.com. She also has this really cool website that's chi.is. Oh my gosh, she's a beautiful Indian woman and was wearing like a super tight, like pencil skirt and like a leather jacket and like these high heel boots, like probably not what you'd
She was
expect from a
rocking it.
PhD. Yeah. And just really super dynamic. I think I did get a picture of her. So this was her, and there she is. Yep, there's a picture of her. I mean, she was just like not what I think anybody expected to be coming out talking about the biofield. We were kind of all expecting like a geeky science person, which she is, but also isn't. So the main part of her presentation was talking about what are the main threats to our overall wellness as a person, and how can conscious-based medicine help?
Okay, first, describe conscious-based medicine.
Yeah, this was great. So she actually asked the audience if anybody could describe consciousness, like in your Starbucks conversation, right? And actually someone did raise their hand, and she's like, go for it. And they did a pretty good job, because that is a hard thing to kind of describe. Like, what is your consciousness? Like your sense of awareness, your
id.
Right, your surroundings. It's kind of everything about you. So your biofield is very similar to that it's kind of this energetic field that's surrounding your entire body at all times. And it's kind of an out there theory for a lot of people. But again, she is a PhD who studies this. And there are a couple of different ways about looking at medicine, which is the theory of pathogenesis, right? Which is basically the germ theory, that everything that is affecting the body is kind of like has an outside force and an outside cure. That's kind of the fundamentals of medicine, like germ theory. Like germs get in, we kill them with antibiotics. Like this is the way that the body functions.
To that point, in the history of man, thank God we figured out parts of that.
Yes.
Because that took us from the pre-industrial ages to where we are now, which is with medications, antibiotics, basically Western medicine stuff.
Absolutely. And again, it is super important. I mean, germs do cause disease.
You're right.
And antibiotics can cure some of them.
But, I mean, it has almost like a paternal approach. Like, if you're sick, we're going to come in from the outside and fix everything for you. I see where this is going, Hugh, please.
Right, and it's limited.
You're right.
So the pathogenic model has limitations, right? That diseases are caused by outside forces, and that the only way to cure it is also kind of an outside force. So things like spontaneous remission, placebo effect, and spiritual healing have limited understanding or are just completely pushed aside by modern medicine.
There was a study when I was in medical school or training, and it was a fairly robust study, and it showed that people that pray, again, not denoting the religious part of this, but just the act of praying, so you can take that where you want. They had better outcomes with surgery.
Yeah.
And they had lower complication rates and quicker healing.
Yeah, and that's actually research that this woman is doing. So talking about integrative health, and more of a holistic approach.
So what is integrative health? We hear that all the time. I meet physicians and they're like, I'm an integrative physician. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And then I walk away. I was like, I don't even know what that really means, to be honest with you.
And it might mean something different for all of those people. It really is talking more about a holistic approach.
Okay, I struggle with that a little bit because when you're a plastic surgeon, you do plastic surgery. Like when you're an anesthesiologist, you do anesthesiology. So what do integrative health physicians do?
Well, part of what we do is somewhat integrative. You have a nutritional therapist who works in your office. We refer to other providers that do a more whole health or whole person-based approach. And really, this comes from, that kind of breaks it down here, that you're looking more at a personalized approach, like using multiple modalities, essentially, systems-based, looking at lifestyle, diet, spirit, mind, body practices, herbs, other alternatives, and it's more preventative in nature.
All right, so that's integrative health, then we definitely do that.
Exactly.
Right, so we do plastic surgery, we focus on nutrition, we focus on lifestyle, we focus on self-perception and basically the mind-body. You definitely recommend herbal medications.
Yep. Yeah, and it's health promoting.
So I think it's reasonable for us to change our moniker from plastic surgery to integrative health plastic surgery.
Integrative plastic surgery? Yeah, absolutely. So there is, like you said about prayer, there is strong evidence for some of these more natural approaches. Like taking yoga just as an example, like it has actually been shown to
lower your blood pressure?
Low blood pressure, it decreases depression, can help with diabetes, helps with blood sugar regulation, helps with menopause, hormonal stuff, cardiovascular, low back pain. These are things that actually yoga has been studied for. So just kind of building the premise that these alternative therapies have evidence behind them, which is something that in medicine you're looking for, right? Like doctors want to see that there's proof that this works.
Right. So data-driven proof, okay, the data has to be run through statistical tests that are appropriate, and then it has to be peer-reviewed. So, and that's kind of one of the problems with medicine, because sometimes it's not very clean? What if it's qualitative medicine, not quantitative?
Right.
So what if it's about how you feel or things that you just can't measure with a tool?
Right. Things that are completely subjective.
Exactly.
Doesn't mean they're not real. I mean, that's like talking about pain. Like pain is subjective, but
Right.
it's
And
still real.
Placebo effect gets into that a little bit.
Yeah.
But there are statistical tests for qualitative data too. I know this for a fact. And it works well. You can actually show scientific evidence of an effect with qualitative data. So there are ways around this, but it is interesting because medicine is stuck in that kind of dogma of data, and
Standard of care.
and measuring.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you lose the forest for the trees. With that said, I will say, I'm just going to, we're going to argue this back and forth. There are certain times when that data matters the most. If you are in an ICU setting and very, very sick, you better hope that you have an intensivist doctor taking care of you that understands all the data, understands the physiology, and works that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are, I mean, this was kind of just more proof that there are these studies now. So there have been studies on biofield therapies. Helpful or full of hype was the study. And also non-touch biofield therapy. So non-touch therapies are things like Reiki.
Here we go.
More energetic fields. But there are studies, and that's kind of the point that this
I mean,
is
number
being
one,
studied.
this stuff is all awesome. And that presenter seems amazing. Plus she's a PhD and probably internationally known.
She is, yeah.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful that she brings these topics up. But when you say Reiki, I cringe a little bit.
Right. But at the same time, you want the best for your patients.
100%,
So
yeah.
if a patient came to you and said, I'd like to consider doing Reiki.
I would totally promote it and support them. And I wouldn't diminish it either.
Right.
I mean, that's somewhat based on my experience with you, but patients really benefit from these alternative treatments.
Yeah. And if it's something that's not going to hurt somebody.
No, exactly.
These are interventions that are completely, they don't have a downside.
Right. That's the way I judge
Yeah.
it. This is what kind of harm could occur.
Right.
Yeah.
So the placebo effect has been measured with some of these as well. I mean, they do look at that when they're doing these studies. This was a really cool study they did on breast cancer patients. So they had these people who had severe fatigue from cancer treatment, essentially. And they were in 3 groups, and these were all breast cancer survivors, which I thought was really cool too, because since you work so much with breast cancer, and it's just something we're really passionate about. So they had one that was getting the Biofield treatments, one that was getting a mock. So basically they taught a person who was not an energy worker, taught them the hand positions. So they still did it. They still did the hand positions, but had no understanding of what they were doing, essentially, just knew that they were supposed to do this and then do this, and that's it. And then a control group that got none. They all, none of the people, the ones in the Biofield or the mock group, the practitioner could not speak to them. So there was no talking. So it's not like you could say they just bonded with their therapist. There was no talking allowed. And then they did this follow-up study. So they got all these sessions, and she had an interview actually that she played from one of these women who was in the mock group, but then they offered them all the real therapy if they chose to do it. And their experiences were really awesome. They really had a marked improvement. They had less fatigue, quality of life outcomes. They had all the charts
on the ones that knew what they were doing.
Right, from the actual Biofield study. So there's a little chart that kind of shows each of the groups.
And you're sure there wasn't a little wink at the end?
Right. I wasn't doing anything, right?
Yeah. That's just play.
Right. But this was an actual study. So.
All right, so the woo-woo stuff that Joe Rogan talks about. So you're talking about for a breast cancer survivor who are near and dear to our hearts, someone went in there and waved their hands around their body, passing energy, and there was a measurable effect. Now, how did they measure that effect? So
one of the main things, of course, there were surveys, but they also did actual studies on biochemical markers as well. So they were checking cortisol. Basically, the way your cortisol works, your cortisol should spike about an hour after you wake up, and then kind of drop off throughout the day. And you can kind of see the difference between abnormal and a more normalized pattern, in these groups. That's a marker that definitely shows kind of what's going on inside your body as far as stress. If you're really stressed out, your cortisol is not going to have a normal slope.
So interesting.
Yeah. So
so you could understand someone doing nothing versus someone waving their hands around. At least you're in a room with someone and you could bond with them on a human level. So that would lower your cortisol.
Right. Just from that touch. Yeah.
Yeah. But then there's this secondary group that is trained in whatever this crazy art of what's it called? Biofield.
Yeah. So there were people who got the touch, right? So it's like those studies on holding a baby. They show that babies that aren't held, have struggle growing. So it wasn't just the touch, and that's why they had to do the 3 groups.
This is such a difficult topic for me. I struggle with this, but then you see actual results, and we see it in our patients.
Yeah.
There's some sort of human connection thing. And, I'm just a scientist at heart, so I'll never be able to rise to the level of the pinstripe skirt with the leather.
Right.
I can't do that.
You can't be rocking the stilettos and the leather skirt. No.
But I just really appreciate this. And, at the very least, if someone's listening to this and they're like, what the hell are they talking about on this podcast, this episode? Realize that this has transformed our practice. When we have embraced alternative treatments, and it doesn't have to be waving your arms around somebody, just, sauna therapies and cryotherapies and acupuncture, which have scientific basis to them, it's made a huge difference in our practice.
Yeah.
And those are recovery. And recovery is basically life, injuries and aging. And incorporating some of these into your life is good.
Yeah. Well, or even just for stress. So this was a really interesting one. So this was actually a study in mice. This was not a human study, but they were looking at stress-induced problems. So stress-induced microvascular damage in animals. So they were having this, they found out with, they'd get these rats or mice that had this type of damage, and then they would put them in either a quiet place or a place with noise that was specific that would really stress them out, would really trigger their fight or flight.
So you blaring AC/DC or something?
Right. Yep. So
how do you stress them?
You play music.
Bright lights?
Something. It was noise.
Do some Al-Qaeda treatment on them?
So they're playing noise. And then so what they did was they still played the noise and had someone doing Reiki. Now Reiki is non-touch, so they're not touching them. And then noise, but fake Reiki. They call it sham Reiki. So it was, again, a person who's just in the room with the mouse while they're being freaked out. And you can look at the amount of leakage on this chart.
That's nuts.
Yeah. So like Dr. Martin said, we're on trauma call. He's going to grab a call. We'll be right back. All right. So something also that will probably resonate with you was studies on cell cultures. So we've talked about studies on humans. We talked about studies on animals. Now we're going to talk about studies on cell cultures. And this was really interesting because these are cells in Petri dishes that they, again, have, in practitioners come in and either do therapeutic touch on them and or not. And so you could...
This is...
Right? Well, so,
So somebody comes into a lab that has cells in a Petri dish and they start rubbing their hands over it or on
do
it?
The therapeutic touch, yeah.
Okay.
And it's about intention. So, but you see the increase in osteoblasts, which they need, but had no effect on the osteosarcoma-derived cell line. So it was causing growth in the cells we wanted to grow in the osteoblasts, but not in the cancer cells. So, I know it's tough. And this is where, for anybody out there who...
Now I know why you're presenting this stuff.
Yes.
And I also know why you never talked to me about this.
That's why. So here's again just another chart that kind of has some, distance healing, energy healing touch, different types of energies essentially.
So this is take for sure that touch has a positive effect. I mean, that's been shown even in Western medicine.
Yes.
That, human touch is huge for patients mentally and physically. There's no question. What is occurring has, scientific components, right? But the other parts of that, what you're inferring, I don't think that you could quantify. But if you see a result, just like going to get acupuncture, and you may not understand how acupuncture works, or we may not fully understand it. It's been shown for centuries to work.
Yeah, and the prayer's on there. There's your prayer. It's the orange one, and it's not even one of the highest ones.
Get your prayer on.
Yeah.
What's the highest one on here?
Energy.
Oh,
energy psychology. Yep.
Okay.
And then therapeutic touch and Reiki are pretty
What is
close.
Reiki? Because do they take a rake and just rake it on your back?
Reiki. So Reiki is a non-touch therapy. So it's a energy therapy that you can do on someone without touching them, essentially.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So it's working with their energy fields and their aura. I struggle to even say that word to you because I know what you think.
When I look at my kids when they act up and I give that really mean face, is that a Reiki? Am I passing that energy externally?
You're definitely passing your energy to them.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So it was really cool. And it was really cool to hear somebody who's actually studying these things because, as you know, those studies are lacking, but they are ongoing. And that's what she's studying. And it's really super cool. She also has some additional, if you want to dive deeper into this, if anybody's interested in looking at more, I would love to go to her Embody the Goddess thing in Santa Cruz. She also does a presentation at Big Sur.
We should take the podcast there.
Oh
Nils and I could embody the goddess too.
You guys could be healing, or we go to Healing from Within. It's in the Bahamas. So she was really awesome. She was super cool.
Okay. She kind of has that vibe. Who's the book that you presented?
Open Wide.
Open Wide. She has that open wide vibe going on.
She does. She definitely has, that understanding that like work on yourself, like inner healing, inner health.
I'm down with that.
Which is, we'll tell patients all the time, like, what is recovery? 99% recovery is in your head.
Oh, totally.
It's a mental fortitude. It's a mental toughness.
Right. And that's the part where it does draw me in because, for example, working out, like if you focus and your head is right, you'll have a better workout. You get more results.
Yeah.
Surgery is the same.
Mind-muscle connection.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it is interesting. Okay. Did not expect this.
Right?
Did not.
It was a really good one.
Is this going to keep going this direction, or are we going to get back into maybe my area?
That's the only one that was kind of woo-woo.
So you started out with the woo-woo.
It was, and that's who started. Like she was the first talk. Mm-hmm. So I guess at that point you were either in or you were out, right?
Oh yeah, totally.
Like, wow, this is not what I was here for.
That would have been funny if someone in the audience just stands up like, I can't take it anymore. Just runs out.
That would have been when we were doing our energy ball work. I didn't talk about that.
She made the audience.
We all did energy balls. Yeah, heck yeah. Okay, so the next one I was really excited about, and this is a talk I told Dr. Martin about before I even went. So it's called Enhance Positive Neuroplasticity Through Mitochondrial Function.
Now we're talking. Mm-hmm. This is straight up my alley. Mitochondrial function.
Yeah, the presenter was Tara Hunkin. She's an FNTP, certified GAPS practitioner, restorative wellness practitioner, and mom. She can be found at mychildwillthrive.com. She also makes a cool box. So she actually did a giveaway. So this talk was on Leap Day, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Leap Day, or was the day before Leap Day, because this was Friday. She gave away 3 of these My Child Will Thrive boxes, which is like a subscription box with really cool stuff in it. To the person, like, she asked if anybody had a Leap Day birthday, and no one did. But there was somebody who was March 2nd, and then a couple other people that were really close. So I'm in April, so I was nowhere near winning a box. But it was pretty cool. So we started talking about the kind of prevalence of these kind of more neuro conditions in our society right now, like ADHD, autism. And they say, the statistics now is 1 in 14 children have some type of neurodevelopmental disorder.
You literally have gone from one hot button issue to another.
I have. Yep.
The last thing I would ever want to talk about in this podcast is autism. People have such strong viewpoints on that.
They do. But that's not what we're going to be talking about. It's really just talking about the prevalence of these types of...
I'm going to have to make my energy ball in the corner. You just finish this part of the episode.
By myself. Yeah. So, especially when you're working with children, like their bodies are a little bit more like neuroplastic, meaning they're a little more moldable. We talked a lot about the parts of the cell. Specifically, we focused on the mitochondria, and this is a great little picture if you remember from your high school biology.
I have to say, the mitochondria always has been my favorite part.
You liked that little kidney bean in there.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
So the endoplastic reticulum.
That's right here. Yeah.
Yeah. I know it all. Yep. I know the whole history of the mitochondria. The Golgi apparatus. So the mitochondria, in its basic form, is an organelle in every cell in your body, and most cells, but almost all cells. Mm-hmm. And it makes the energy for your body, the energy that makes us who we are, that allows us to do activities every day, called ATP.
Yep.
And it is they always call it like the battery or the power cell. There's always, kind of dumb names for it. The mitochondria we're finding now with aging, and if you notice, if you are this age or you have parents that are older, their energy levels go down with each decade. By and large, is kind of related to the functioning of the mitochondria. Mm-hmm. And something I read was really interesting. Mitochondria, a long, long time ago, like billions of years ago, I'm sure, were actually bacteria. Mm-hmm. And they became incorporated into eukaryotes, that's us, and ultimately became humans. And so mitochondrial I think it's RNA or DNA, which is shorter than our DNA, the blueprint in our body, has a lot of association with certain types of bacteria.
With bacteria, yeah. It does. And, just kind of some basic nutritional therapy stuff about cell function. If you look at the way a cell is, like everything's kind of floating around in this cytoplasm inside the cell. And the key thing is that there's a permeable barrier on a cell, like a phospholipid bilayer. So the good things have to get in, but the bad things have to be able to get out. So to have really properly functioning mitochondria, you have to be making sure that you're getting the things into your cells that are actually going to be able to be made into energy. So making sure your cell walls are healthy is something I talk about all the time. And this is why, because if you can't get anything in, you're not going to be able to function optimally.
Right. If you're going to make the energy, you have substrates to make the energy. ATP just doesn't occur by itself. Adenosine triphosphate, there's components in that you need to make ATP, and then also the enzymes and the pathways that are involved.
Yeah. And you pretty much talked about everything on this slide, just where they are.
I should give this talk.
Yep, you could. Mitochondria are responsible for ATP. Cells have different amounts of mitochondria, so some have more than others, based on what they need.
Right. So think about
energy.
it. Like muscle cells have a lot of mitochondria, right? Because that's where you need the energy, whereas, more static cells, maybe like fat cells and stuff, probably don't have as much.
Yeah. And they have their own DNA, which is what you talked about. It's called mtDNA. So they have their own specific DNA.
And there is, I remember from medical school, actually, mitochondrial disorders, like children suffer from that. They're so interesting and some of them are devastating. They're actually, most of them are really devastating and sad for these young kids because they perish. They don't make it in life. And that's where we've learned a lot about the mitochondria functioning, which in the end, I think a lot of therapies in the future for aging and for diseases are going to be focused on the mitochondria.
And energy in general.
And energy in general. So I would have loved this talk. What was her ultimate kind of bring home the message? What was her?
We'll get to it.
Okay, good.
I want to skip the whole thing. So we talked about how ATP is produced, which we did talk about. I mean, obviously you need all these things. You need oxygen molecule. You need energy from food. I mean, so you have to give it the right building blocks to actually build anything. We talked about the correlation between glutamate and astrocytes. So glutamate excites those neurotransmitters, so like you need it. Glycolysis is going to stimulate glycolysis in the astrocytes, which are other cells. So you can basically deplete that, and that's what happens in some of these kids who have like hypersensitivities. Like they'll run through that really fast, and that's why they'll like be hyperactive, but then just really fatigued, like drop off and be like lethargic. So they're more sensitive to it than adults are.
Can you supplement glutamate?
We talk about supplements, yes, and you actually can. So results of impaired glutamate neurotransmitter activity has impacts on the neuroplasticity, learning, and memory. And that's why we talked when we talked about tics, because neurons that fire together wire together. And those things there's biofeedback loops that become more and more solidified. So someone that has a tic, the more they do that tic, the more it will become solidified, because those neurons start firing together, and that's how they fire all the time then. So you really want to make sure that you're staying, to stop that, you have to work on that all the time, because you have to then stop that in that same way, like as constantly. And that's why therapies for kids who are struggling with these things have to be really frequent. Speech therapy, behavioral therapy, they have to be all the time. It can't be like once a week, because that old feedback loop is going to be way stronger than the new one.
Sure.
Which I thought was really interesting. So that theory of like neurons that fire together, wire together was really cool. I mean,
again, that goes right back to the workout stuff.
Yep.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. You're teaching things to work together.
Your neuromuscular kind of, tics are related to the muscles too, so.
Well, and encouraging that pattern. Absolutely. So what does the mitochondria need to generate ATP? And we kind of touched on the oxygen component. It needs fuel from food, fats,
I feel like
protein,
we should
carbohydrates.
ask Nils this question.
Right. But there are other things that are required. And this is a really interesting conversation, because this gets more into like, should you supplement with all of these things? And this is where, when you were talking about mitochondria kind of being the key to aging, these are all the things that people who
let's go through those real quick.
Anti-aging.
For the audience.
Yeah. So CoQ10.
Okay.
It's a enzyme.
Take it.
The B vitamins.
Take it.
All of them. Carnitine.
Don't take that.
L-carnitine.
I get that in meat, right?
You do. And acetyl L-carnitine. You also get it in like your protein powders and things like that.
Yeah, so I get it. Take it.
Yeah. Creatine.
Take it.
D-ribose. You don't.
I don't take that.
Because I'd order it for it. It's a powder. It tastes like maple syrup. It's really good. And then some minerals. So minerals, remember, are cofactors. They work in combination with each other. So.
Yeah, you've talked multiple times. You've said that about mineral deficiencies. We've never talked about that.
Yeah,
at some point we should.
We should. I mean, we could do a whole podcast just on minerals.
Yeah, like copper and iron and zinc and all those. Yep. Yeah, it's so interesting. What do you get minerals from?
Magnesium from your diet.
Yeah.
Yep. Like from eating the right kinds of foods. So there are.
What about my cast iron?
I mean, yeah, you do actually get iron from cooking in cast iron. You actually do.
I've always wondered that.
It does. You absolutely do.
Nice.
Yeah, so oxidative stress is one of the things that really affects how your mitochondria function. So when you have mitochondrial dysfunction, it's usually from oxidative stress. So free radicals basically are in the cell. They can't get neutralized or they can't get out. They start to damage parts of the cell, parts of the tissue. You don't have enough glutathione to process all of these. It's kind of a cascade. So that ends up, what the end result of that is you have an imbalance of these reactive oxygen species and antioxidants, so they're not in balance. And the result of that is oxidative stress, which is going to impair your mitochondrial function, which is impairing your energy, which is impairing everything.
Right. So aging is an accumulation of damage When you're younger, you're more like what you use the word plasticity. You're more flexible. You can recover quicker, et cetera, et cetera. And it's pretty good up until like the fourth decade, and then the wheels start to fall off. So, and that is primarily related to your body's inability to keep up with the damage that's occurring. And the ability to fix the damage in its baseline is dependent on energy production, right? Because you're doing work. And when your ability to make energy for a lot of different reasons, could be nutritional, could be just age related, could be disease related. That's when you have all these problems.
Yeah, and that's kind of that cascading effect. And remember, in kids who have, some of these issues, they're depleting a lot of their glycogen through these periods of hyperactivity and then can't build it back up quickly enough. So antioxidants and precursors are things that are going to help, with this antioxidant reactive oxygen species balance are things like ALA or alpha lipoic acid, vitamins C and E, melatonin is an important one, and they give that to a lot of kids who are struggling with attention deficit issues. Your polyphenols, so resveratrol is one of them, which you are going to love. Carotenoids, which are like lipocene.
Eat carrots all the time.
Yep. EGCG, which is in green tea. It's the compound found in green tea.
That sounds like a club you would go to.
Right, the EGCG.
Yeah.
Selenium, zinc, and glutathione, which is one that I'm a huge fan of. This is also where we start talking about NAC, and again, more of the B vitamins. And PQQ is a supplement that a lot of people probably haven't heard of, but it's pretty big in like the anti-aging field for that reason.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah. So there are a lot of companies that make these like mito cocktails, like combinations of supplements that are really going to be good for your mitochondria.
So I had this thought, because we've talked a lot about this, but we should start like a restaurant bar that's called like mitochondria, right? So if someone does this and I just said this on the episode, then I get at least some ownership.
We get some credit. Yep, original thought
right
there.
So you would go there just like an oxygen bar, but you would go there purely based on mitochondrial health.
I mean, there kind of are like the places that do like IV therapy.
Right.
It's kind of what they're doing.
All right, well, let's steal my thunder.
But I mean, just
But it had to be fun, it's not like you had to go there and hang out. There's like pictures of mitochondria on the wall. And like,
do it in a float tank.
Yeah.
So most of these mito cocktails, so if you're looking to, supplement to help your mitochondria be healthy, PQQ, coenzyme Q10, we talked about all the B vitamins, C and E, ALA, vitamin K is another one we've talked a lot about on the podcast. More B vitamins, selenium, ginkgo. Didn't you just send me an article about ginkgo?
Yeah, what was that for?
For Raynaud's.
Raynaud's disease, yeah.
Yep.
So apparently, I have Raynaud's. This is really interesting. So 80% of the population has some variants, some either more progressive or subtle Raynaud's disease. I thought that was really high, but that's what the article said. And ginkgo is one of the things that people don't understand that has a real positive effect on Raynaud's disease.
Yeah, and ginkgo can help with blood flow. Like it's a good one. That's why we have to have people stop taking it before surgery, because it can kind of thin your blood a little. D-ribose is something, interestingly enough, so there was a patient who came in and was looking for some nutritional recommendations as she was getting ready to have some radiation treatment.
Yeah.
You know what I recommended?
D-ribose?
D-ribose and creatine.
That's pretty good.
Because those are things that are going to help her cells have energy while she's undergoing this treatment.
So with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, they both have their neurodegenerative diseases where they lose certain neurons. Neurons need energy to work. And I think that's in one of the ways that the creatine, because creatine is really good at restoring ADP, I think. I'd have to look at the process, but it helps with reformulation of the ADP, which goes to ATP, or helps with production of energy. And that really helps in the brain.
Yep.
So people that are compromised, allowing them to make more energy, specifically in the brain, makes their symptoms less prominent. And that's why creatine is actually really good for people that have Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Yeah.
There's no negative to it.
There really isn't. There's no downside.
Why does creatine have such a bad... why do people think creatine is going to destroy your kidneys and it's like really bad for you? And some people even think it's like illegal. Like if you say, is it because of the whole muscle building?
I don't know anyone who thinks that, but then again, I run in the bro world, so
yeah,
it's big with my people.
It is? Okay. Like regular people are like, oh my God, you take creatine?
I guess I've never known the downside
like
of it.
it's like anabolic steroids or something.
It's not. It's totally legal. It's found in meat. Like you need it to survive.
You do.
Yes. Yeah. So,
actually, I would say that of all that list, creatine is probably the most important thing you could take. Would you agree with that?
As far as supplementing, I think especially if you do any type of weight bearing or weightlifting, which you should be doing, yes, you need to be supplementing with creatine.
Yeah, that's like the first thing you start with.
Yep. Yeah. So overall, it was super interesting, and just kind of a really good look at kind of how to make your mitochondria happy. Yeah.
Mitochondrial health is the future.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes.
Okay.
So this next one, it'll be pretty quick. This was cool. It was called 40s on Fire from Catherine Koss. She's an NTP. Yep. 40s on Fire. We're all in good company. Her Instagram is primal_musings.
Okay, I already love her.
And her website is primalmusings.com. Her book is called 40s on Fire.
I mean, she's the best.
Yeah. So what I loved about
I call her KK.
KK, was this. So we talked about many things. She talked about a lot, but I won't go into a lot of details on this. But when this slide came up, anyone who has listened to our podcast or knows me well knows that I like to say squat ladies and squatting. So the best body weight movement to work on daily. So it's the toothbrush to our joints, helps to align everything. Squatting helps align the shoulders, spine, knees, hips, and ankles. It isn't just for CrossFitters. Squatting helps with mobility, stability, strength, balance, and coordination at every age and every level.
Yep.
So that is my takeaway from this. Get out there and squat, ladies.
Squat.
40s on Fire, squat. So she was really good. Okay.
Is that all we got for her?
That's all we got. Yep.
She was my faves.
Primal Musings. Check her out. Yep.
I'm gonna bring KK on the podcast. I would love to have her on here.
She was good.
Was she kind of outgoing and fun?
No.
Okay. Hope she doesn't listen to this.
Yeah. I'm just being honest.
She very acerбically said, "You must squat."
I was like, hell yeah. Woo, let's squat now. So the day finished out with someone who I was super excited to see. So if you know much about nutrition, you probably have at some point heard of Dr. Terry Wahls. She wrote a book called The Wahls Protocol that she actually used to kind of help herself not recover, but go into remission with her MS. Like, she was in a wheelchair and she walks and is totally fine now. So she, was diagnosed with MS. She was having pretty significant degeneration of her MS to the point where she was using a cane, using a walker, and was in a wheelchair, and was really thought that this was it for her. She was interested in nutrition and started really kind of working with herself, ended up writing this book called The Wahls Protocol. Her presentation was called The Many Faces of Ketogenic Living and Thriving. And it was really interesting because this is why I would want to talk to you about it, because you and I have had we've had many conversations about keto.
Keto.
Right. And the connection to high cholesterol and all these other things that you kind of assume would go along with the ketogenic diet. And I personally, as a nutritional therapy practitioner and just as a person, I'm not a huge fan of keto, but I know that it has a great place in nutrition.
Yeah, it has definitely a place, and definitely a place for neurodegenerative diseases.
100%, with the exception of one, which we'll talk about.
I think our issue, or our mutual issues with keto, are not as much about keto itself, and that it is a viable option for people. It's just very hard to maintain. It is very hard to maintain. Yeah. And the real question is, should you? And Terry Wahls talked about all of this, and it was really, really fascinating. So why don't you just quickly, for people listening, obviously most of them listen to this would know keto, but why don't you just explain what ketogenic diet is? So a truly ketogenic diet is a very high-fat diet. It's not a high-protein diet. In a ketogenic diet, you're getting anywhere from probably 60 to 80% of your calories from fat, and then a very small portion from protein and an even smaller portion from carbohydrates. So it's a low-carb, high-fat diet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Low protein. That's very key. It is a low-protein diet as well, or lower protein. Because protein can be ketogenic too. It can be. It kicks on glycolysis. Yeah. So, which is funny because when you're trying to bulk up and work out, people always do high-protein diets. But if you don't expend the calories, that's just going to end up going to protein. It's the chain to turn protein into anything else is long. You can do it though. You can, but you would have to be extremely over-consuming on calories in general before protein would be taken out of that matrix and turned into anything other than muscle or excreted. My point was that protein can go to fat ultimately. It can, but it would be in an extreme cases. Right, gotcha. So Terry Wahls can be found on Instagram at Dr. Terry Wahls, so Dr. Terry Wahls, Whals. Her website is terrywahls.com, and her book, of course, is The Wahls Protocol. And there is a re-release of it coming out, like an updated version coming out, I think, in March of 2020. So be sure to check that out. So we started off talking about what are the lifestyle-induced chronic diseases, and there are many of them. So things like heart disease, stroke, diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome or syndrome X, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and some cancers have a link to basically lifestyle factors can cause these diseases. And that's pretty scary, right? Like, your lifestyle is causing a lot of these things, but what it is not causing is some of your neurodegenerative conditions. Those things are not being caused by your lifestyle, perhaps, but they might be really impacted by changing your lifestyle. She's done a lot of studies
So many, and she's actually doing more now, specifically for patients with MS. But this was a really interesting study that she talked about with memory and aging specifically. So patients who have Alzheimer's disease, they also did a lot of studies with Parkinson's. So this one was looking at not only Alzheimer's but also the progression of Parkinson's in old age. So they studied both populations essentially, and looking at the basically impact of diet on these conditions as they progressed. So memory, motor function, and dietary intake were all looked at. They used specific diets. They used the MIND diet, which is kind of like a combination of diets, the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet. Those are the three. I thought there were more. There were not. Okay. So they followed these people for almost 5 years, so 4.7 years. And then they obviously have a chart and ways that they broke down all this data. It's a huge study. And when they have studies of this size, like there's so much data, so you have to figure out a way to kind of break it all down. But looking at the cognitive decline specifically on the MIND diet only, the MIND less, which was the DASH Mediterranean kind of mix, and then the DASH diet. So the effect for each of these things, obviously changed based on which diet they were on, which was pretty cool.
I just want to look, because you're in the weeds here. So the MIND diet is going to be the keto diet, the Mediterranean diet, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the Mediterranean diet is going to be what you would expect with the Mediterranean diet. And then what was the other one?
DASH. So DASH is actually it stands for something. It's the extremely low salt, essentially like low fat, high carb diet.
Okay.
Low fat, high carb.
Low fat, high carb, low salt. Gotcha.
Yep. Yeah. But just looking at these things, and they do have a protective effect on these patients. So for the degenerative conditions, as far as like memory goes, they actually did really help. They looked at longevity, mental clarity, and cognition, and mood, specifically with the ketogenic diet in this study. This was a different study specific with ketogenic diet to reduce. They found a reduction in mortality, midlife mortality, improved outcomes of neurodegenerative diseases, improved focus and cognition, and improvements in mood. So pretty cool that they actually have studied this. Like this actually has been studied.
So if you consider that Parkinson's and Alzheimer's are kind of a side effect of aging, really, ultimately, I mean, we're finding now, at least with Parkinson's, I don't know as much about Alzheimer's, that Parkinson's may have etiologies. Like, what was the one thing I sent you with the Parkinson's comes
the gut.
From the gut.
Gut bacteria.
Yeah,
yep.
And it goes up through the vagus nerve into the brain.
And she did mention that briefly, like kind of the bacterial theory of some of these diseases, specifically like MS and Parkinson's.
So gut related. Mm-hmm. So many of these have gut, your intestines, and somehow, when I was in medical school, you always learned that nothing went through the blood-brain barrier.
It was impenetrable.
Right, and that's all bullshit.
Not true.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Not a doctor word.
Not a doctor word?
Okay, well, that's the way you go. I'm a surgeon. I'm allowed to say it. So, but it's interesting. So take a step back here, because we're trying to make this so people can relate to it. If ketogenic diets are good for people with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and that is basically a side effect of aging, it's just a more progressed side effect of aging, then why wouldn't ketogenic diets be good for everyone?
So we talked a lot about that. And that's where I knew you were going to be super interested in this, because this is the slide I have up right now.
So am I like going down the right path here?
You are. So risks of nutritional ketosis over time, right? Why wouldn't everybody just be in ketosis all the time? If it's so great for preventing, seizures and epileptics and helps with memory and cognition in people with Alzheimer's disease, shouldn't everybody just be in ketosis? Absolutely not. So there are risks of ketosis. You don't want to stay in ketosis for an extended period of time. And she repeated this over and over and over again. So ketosis is not meant to be a lifestyle diet.
Which is huge, because you have a pro-ketogenic diet physician who's telling you that you do not need to be in ketosis all the time.
You should not.
So cycling of ketosis is better than full ketosis, right? Now, what does the keto community believe? Full ketosis all the time?
I mean, I think there are some people who believe that. And yes, there are instances where someone should stay in ketosis. I mean, if you're dealing with somebody with, severe Alzheimer's, perhaps Parkinson's, and the really challenging thing with those two conditions is people are not diet compliant, so it's really hard. It really is helpful for things like dementia, but they're really not compliant, which
difficult.
Is hard. And there's a whole talk about dementia, which was really interesting too. But ketosis is meant to be used as an intervention in most people, not as a lifestyle. And that's from what, is studied and kind of proven with this, is it's not really meant, this is not the way our bodies are meant to run forever. We're meant to be flexible. Like our bodies run very well on carbohydrates. They also can run on fat. Like we're humans. We need a mix of all these things.
What was that study we talked about? I think it's called the FAST study. Do you remember that? Where they took those high-end athletes and they put them on different types of diet. It was called FAST, F-A-S-T.
Yep.
We have to look that up. Maybe we can post that in the episode notes.
Yeah.
So the FAST study talked about how they put these high-end athletes on a high-fat diet, high-carb diet, and really, to be honest with you, they perform well with each.
Mm-hmm. But it took a long time for them to become fat adapted.
They had to adjust, but once they adjusted, their performance was fairly similar. And it just showed the main point of all. It showed, number one, that you can be on a high-fat diet and really perform well.
Yep, still be an athlete.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it also showed that the body is amazingly transformative.
We have good metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, you can just kind of eat whatever you want as long as you get the calories and nutrients you need. Your body will work through it.
It will. It doesn't mean it's optimal, but it will work through it. Yep. Eating whatever you want is maybe not optimal. But there are definitely times when a person should absolutely not use ketosis ever. And that's if they are already nutritionally deficient, if they have excessive weight loss or they start having excessive weight loss. If you're underweight, like she said under 19% body fat, like absolutely not for women, not for men. Men can be a little bit lower. Anyone who has a potential decrease in bone density already. So like if you have osteopenia already, you probably shouldn't start a ketogenic diet because that is one of the things that the ketogenic diet is a little bit deficient is in calcium. Because the body is perceiving there's insufficient nutrition. If you are at all in your reproductive years, she even went so far as to say like she won't work with a woman who is not using birth control who's in her reproductive years. Like will not let them do keto, at least not with her. Like she will not. I like
Dr. Wall.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about lipids, and this is what Dr. Martin has always asked. Like, doesn't this make your lipids go nuts? And there is now studies on this, and there didn't really used to be. Like, it used to be that the keto community kind of said that was, not true, and your markers are fine, but that can be a problem. And if someone has
hypercholesterolemia, familial, if it runs in your family.
Right, and you have it. Like, there are ways around it, though. So in those cases, and this was what I found really interesting, so you should always monitor your fasting lipids when you're doing a ketogenic diet. Things like MCT oil and coconut oil or coconut milk is going to make more ketones. So you probably need more carbs. So if you're doing keto with MCT oil as your choice of fat, you're going to need more carbs. And this would shock people who are diehard keto that like you could be 50 to 80 grams of carbs. But because you're making so many ketones from the coconut and MCT oil, you can actually eat more carbs, which can make keto a lot more tolerable for people. However, if you have issues with high blood or high cholesterol and your cholesterol levels are going up when you're on this, you need to switch to olive oil as your fat source. Olive oil makes fewer ketones, but then you have to lower your carbs. The other thing you can do if you're dealing with high cholesterol is add intermittent fasting, cyclical intermittent fasting, or like longer term fasting. So
yeah, but it's not one-to-one. Like I'm not going to get into this because we're not lipid,
We're not lipidemiologists.
Yeah, we're not.
Nope.
So, but it's not one-to-one. Like if you have a propensity for high cholesterol, it doesn't mean that if you just eat high cholesterol, your cholesterol is going to keep going up and up. It doesn't work that way. It's a lot more complicated than that. But like if there's people that really do struggle with familial hypercholesterolemia, meaning it runs in your family, then dietary changes, which have been recommended for a while now from cardiologists, do really work. If you eat more leafy vegetables, decrease, some of your fat intake that related to cholesterol.
Right. And making sure that your fat is what source your fat is coming from, I think is really what you see as
and
key
you taught
here.
me that. But I think in a standard way, I think our idea that if you eat an egg, all of a sudden your cholesterol is going to go up, it just doesn't work that way anymore. Or at least our understanding realizes it doesn't work that way. And it's a little bit more nuanced and complicated than that.
Yeah.
So, and the problem is you go into physicians' offices, they try to distill it down to its base level so people understand. And they're not going to have a nuanced conversation with you. So your internist is going to tell you, well, don't eat eggs and cholesterol.
Well,
right?
or take this high cholesterol medication, which is also not the answer.
But, in some cases it is. And then actually the longevity portions of statins, there's a whole other aspect to this, by the way. We're not going to get into this conversation, right?
That is not what this talk is about.
There's secondary benefits. So, sorry. Keep going.
So just really, I thought that was what was interesting to me because that's something that you and I have talked so much about. And yes, that is true. If you have...
I like the idea of intermittent fasting, though.
Yeah, and I'll talk a lot more about that in future talks here. Okay, so this was so cool. The next presenter was Param Dita. Oh, presentation title. I have nothing in there. What was his presentation title? The Power of Sleep. I was really excited to listen to this.
This is going to be a depressing talk for me.
No, it's not. So you can find out more about him at canyonranch.com. He is one of the on-staff physicians there. And that's
Explain what Canyon Ranch is.
Canyon Ranch is a wellness retreat, I would say.
Please.
Yeah. So we started off just kind of talking about what are the functions of sleep, the function and premise of sleep, right? It restores, resets, repairs, reduces inflammation, improves mood. It's good for your heart health, brain activity, memory, joy, and energy. Oh my gosh, he was awesome. I wish I had a picture of him because he was also an Indian guy. And the way he talked was so hysterical. He was really animated, but in a really subdued kind of way. So like he'd be like sitting there and he'd be like doing these little like smile things to the crowd. He was so cute. Big guy too. He's probably 6'4". And
Really?
like, yeah, he was an athlete. So I mean, he just had super intense V-taper, like looked like a triathlete. Yeah. In fact, I think actually that's how he met one of the other guys there was doing triathlon.
Did you comment to him when you talked to him that he had a good V-taper?
Like, I'm digging your V-taper. No, I did not. So there's stages of sleep. I'll just kind of do a brief overview of sleep. So we have our wake, right? We're resting perhaps with our eyes closed. Transition, which is when we're kind of transitioning in between phases of sleep. Stage 2 is the typical, which is kind of the bulk of your sleep. Then we have deep sleep, which makes up 15 to 25%. And then our REM sleep, which should make up about 15 to 25%. And those stage 3 and your REM are your recovery sleep. So these are, if you wrote key opportunities. So these are times for your body to kind of grow.
So what's the ring we have?
The aura.
Okay.
Yep.
So the main thing with that, what I look up when I wake in the morning, so aura ring tracks your sleep, and it does it by heart rate and temperature.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You should really look at this thing if you care about sleep. And you can put it on airplane mode so you don't get all the EMFs.
Yeah, that's the only ring out there that does this.
Right. But it's an amazing tool for sleep. And I know we'll get into this, but one of the things I really look at are stage 3, which is deep sleep and REM, and it really breaks it down to percentage of time. It doesn't always mean, so if you sleep 3 hours, but you get good stage 3 and REM sleep, that's better than getting none. But the duration of that also does make a difference for quality of sleep.
It does, and we'll talk about that. The quality and quantity matter. So disordered sleep has a lot of negative outcomes. And when you're not sleeping well, you are at higher risk of hypertension, obesity, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, which we just talked about, heart disease, stroke, dementia, kind of the outcomes of those things in early death.
Discussions.
Right. And why is that? Because, I mean, if you're not
I know why it is, because your cortisol is elevated, you're not getting your recovery. I mean...
Yeah, your brain is not getting a chance to kind of wash itself. So the things he said, he's like, no one's going to like hearing this, but it is not normal to fall asleep if reading quietly in the afternoon, drift off at afternoon meetings, sleep on airplanes, which I'm like, seriously, I'm like narcoleptic on an airplane. Like as soon as they turn the engines on, I'm like, oh, good, it's sleep. Fall asleep watching TV in the early evenings, sleep while you're a passenger in a car, doze off while waiting at red lights or stoplights.
What?
Which,
I mean, I don't do any of these because I never sleep, but like this is like everyone. Like literally everyone. Every time I look over, some passenger's sleeping in the car. I'm like, how is that even possible? When you're on a plane, half the people are sleeping.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, like I said, that's not normal. So these are things that as practitioners, we need to be curious about. Like if you hear, I don't need sleep, I'm fine with 4 to 5 hours of sleep. Yes, I sleep. I get 10 or more hours.
Yeah, that's a problem
night.
too.
That's a problem.
It's interesting. The study came out recently that talked about people that get over 9 or 10 hours of sleep, that they have a higher mortality rate. And I was listening to a sleep specialist talk about that. And he said, well, that's really kind of skewed because people that tend to get over 10 hours sleep tend to have medical conditions.
Or depressed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so obviously their mortality is going to be higher than the standard healthy people.
Well, but it kind of shows, I mean, like we talked about with mitochondria, if you are extremely lethargic and you're not producing energy in your cells, you're probably not super healthy. You're probably sleeping 10 hours or more a night. I catch up on sleep over the weekends, or I'm a great sleeper. I can sleep anytime,
so that's like such
anywhere.
the 20s thing, like when these people would, like not sleep for like 4 days for work and going out or school, and then like they would take Saturday and Sunday and sleep the whole
all day. Yeah. So those are things that like, we should be cued into. If these are things you notice in yourself, like maybe dig a little deeper. They might be fine, but these are times where you could dig a little deeper. Because of lack of sleep, I mean, you're at risk of increased traffic accidents, occupational errors, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, cancer, depression, memory impairment, professional performance, academic struggles, poor quality of life, and reduced productivity.
This is going to start talking about breathing again.
Right. So this is an interesting study. This
your
was
last breath.
Yeah. So this was, they gave these tests essentially to people after being deprived of sleep. So they actually, the red line on the far side is the number of errors on this test after they kept people up basically for 3 days. Super high, right?
Which is super
errors.
crazy because in residency, all they do is sleep restrict you.
He talked about that too, specifically with doctors.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's good because you're compromised and you learn how to use your hands when you're under duress, but that's just, you would think that because of what we know with this, what they would do in residency is like block out sleep for these residents so they could be high performers, you know?
Yeah.
Like if you ran an NBA team, you wouldn't restrict your NBA players from sleeping.
It'd be stupid.
Right?
Yeah.
It's idiotic.
You want them to perform
right.
well.
And it's all about productivity and making money off the residents.
Yeah.
I didn't say that.
The really interesting thing, though, was you deprive patients of sleep entirely. I mean, anybody who has ever not slept for 2 straight days know how very compromised they are. But even just continually only sleeping for 4 to 6 hours a night, look at that. By the end of 2 weeks, look at how compromised they were. They were making more errors, almost, or the same amount of errors as people who hadn't slept in 2 days.
Right. So can I just stop for a second?
Yeah.
So this is interesting because I think about this a lot. So I don't sleep well, but I do sleep a good amount, and I have good quality sleep.
So you don't sleep a lot, but you have good quality.
Yeah. And who's your guy? Dave Asbury?
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about this on his podcast. He was talking about that he only gets 6 to 7 hours sleep. He and I are fairly similar, but his quality of sleep is really good.
Correct. And he uses an Oura ring.
He uses a ring, uses a weighted blanket. He does what's the chili pad?
Chili pad.
Yeah, I just ordered
It's called
that.
chili pad.
So you got to keep your body temperature at 67 degrees. This is a whole thing here. It's a whole world for sleep.
But this
out
is
there.
why.
I understand.
The consequences.
I understand. So he asked the sleep guy, I forget his name, the expert who was really good, and he said, yeah, it's probably not great, like meaning that you should get 7 hours of sleep, but as long as you're getting good quality sleep. And that's the main thing. Is it's not that you just want 8 hours of sleep, but you can get 8 hours of really crappy sleep. Mm-hmm. If you've ever been on a plane and slept 8 hours and you get woken up every hour, you don't feel good when you wake up. That's for the reason you never get to your deep sleep and your REM sleep. So it's not just the distance or the amount, it's the quality too together. And I mean that's why sleep's hard.
Yeah. It's quality and quantity. One of the main consequences of poor sleep is hunger. And that is something you cannot control. That is in your brain chemistry. When you are fatigued, your brain is calling out for sugar. It's calling out for fat because it wants energy. It wants fast energy from sugar. It wants long energy from fat.
So
and it wants it now.
In residency, when you finish call, we all went down to the cafeteria and ordered the crappiest food.
Yes.
And then if you think about you in your life, if you've been up all night, you went to, like you were younger, you went to a party or a concert, and you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you do? You all go to breakfast and get like really greasy food. Oh, I feel so much better. And then you're like, oh, because it cures my hangover or whatever. Well, it's more related to your brain chemistry, mm-hmm. right? Like it's craving these fats and these sugars.
And this is chemical. Like these chemicals are actually
right.
studied. They can do blood draws on people who are deprived of sleep and see the increase in these things that are literally making you crave these things. Not great. So attention, we've talked about, unable to deal with complicated problems. I mean, like when you're super sleep deprived, like is that the time to have like a really like challenging conversation with somebody?
I've tried.
Yeah. Like
that was a mistake.
Not. Yes. You're also, your judgment is impaired, risk-taking behaviors, all of those things are impaired. Also, people who are having difficulty sleeping, we talked about restless leg syndrome and some of the causes of that, acquired or genetic. It's one of the main reasons why people are not sleeping well during the night, whether or not they even realize it. So it can be something that you might not realize you have, but definitely something to look into if you are having trouble sleeping. We talked a lot about sleep apnea.
Yeah, so you have restless leg, you have sleep apnea, you have men and their prostates and having to urinate.
Which again, getting
you have
up
women and their hormones.
The
their hormones change, so they get hot flashes.
Yeah, sleep apnea has a really strong correlation between heart conditions because if you're not breathing at night, you're not getting oxygen to your heart.
Leads to pulmonary hypertension.
Yes, it's elevates blood sugar.
Is there any good part of this talk? Or are we going to keep going down this pit?
No, so we'll let's that was kind of the end of the slides for that one. But really, what he talked about was like you need joy in your life, and if you're not getting good quality sleep, like you're missing out on joy.
So this gets under my skin because it's like saying, oh, you should just be healthy, eat right, Like this is the problem I have with people that espouse the benefits of sleep, which I absolutely believe in. That's my Mount Rushmore, of health is sleep, and it's on my Mount Rushmore. And so, but like they don't give you, basically the ways to get good sleep are, number one, what's the bio, you have to get into good behaviors. There's a name for that. Bio something. Behavioral
sleep
therapy,
health.
biobehavioral therapy.
Oh, he talked about that. He talked about
What's the-
cognitive behavior. There's actually an app
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
that's
Sorry.
in my notes. So when you're done, I'll talk about my notes.
So
for this.
cognitive behavioral therapy is the big one, okay? And then you get into stress reduction in your life. And then you get into sleep hygiene, which I'm totally good at now. And then you get into all the little tricks, which maybe not everyone needs to do, but for someone like me, it's been helpful. Weighted blanket, chili pad, Oura ring, Aura, whatever. And if they ever
Oura,
watch,
Aura.
if that company ever watches
They're
this
like, what?
podcast, they're like, why can't the guys say the name?
Aura.
So Oura, Aura. And I'm sure that's the way aura is spelled, isn't it? Oh my God.
Well, aura, no, your physical aura is with an A.
That's
A-U-R-A.
okay, yeah.
Aura, yeah. Aura. So there were a couple of apps that he actually recommended. So he did not leave this with no helpful tips on how to sleep better. His main one was blue blocking glasses at night. So
That's another thing, lights. So that was the thing that Dave Asbury did. Is he gets rid of all lights at night. He says his house is almost dark. And then he put in his bathroom, so he has red lights everywhere at nighttime because it's not blue.
Yep.
And then he put in his bathroom, the can lights aren't even LED because LED is really bad. So we all have LED can lights now because they're cheaper and they last longer.
really bad for our eyes.
Really bad for our eyes.
And for our health in general. They're
Even if
not
you get
great.
the LED lights that have you can get the different K on them. The ones that are more blue and ones that are more sunlight. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's all perception. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just perception. But wearing blue blocking glasses was the number one thing he recommended. So making sure then that what that's going to do is help your body produce more melatonin at night. If you're constantly exposed to bright light, especially blue lights, your body is not going to be making enough melatonin to really help you fall asleep and stay asleep. Key things with that are exposure to your phone, your tablet, the LED lights in your house at night. So wearing blue blocking glasses really does help. And that way you can still live a normal life at night and be sociable with your family and watch TV and whatever. Blue blocking glasses will really, really help. Sleeping in a dark, cool room, super important. There were two apps that he mentioned that are for cognitive behavioral therapy. Snore Lab was one, and Sleep Cycle. And then there's another one that actually is called CBTI Coach. So cognitive behavioral therapy. I don't remember what the I stands for, coach. Really, really help. And also, people are really struggling, like going to a cognitive behavioral therapist is also really helpful. So there are things you can do, and that it's really important. And I know that talked a lot about the negative side effects of not getting enough sleep, but that's why. It's because it is so important. And so many people have those things like, I
think at a conference like that, I think the people there know that no sleep is terrible for you. So can we just get to the point now where we can start getting answers to this? Because it seems like people say the same talk over and over. Sleep's really bad. We know that. Okay. So what can we do?
Yeah,
Empower ourselves
and address your underlying medical conditions. If you have restless
I think
leg,
we need to get some more Reiki going on while I'm sleeping.
Snoring,
You get the
sleep
Reiki
apnea.
people, the hands over me while I'm sleeping. Do you think my wife would think it's weird if strange people came in my room and rubbed their
We're
hands
just standing across and just looking at you.
in the middle of the night?
Yep. I'm doing Reiki on you right now.
Don't worry.
That's my
Barb,
Reiki
it's just
therapist.
the Reiki
Yeah.
person when I'm sleeping.
Yes, I think that would be weird. Yeah. So he was super cool.
I like that guy.
Really, really awesome. The next discussion was actually a very interesting one because it was a kind of a group discussion with a panel. I said it's a panel discussion. So it was the 4 templates that all nutritional therapy practitioners should know. With 4 people there, it was Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. She can be found on Instagram at Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, Lyon with a Y. Her website is also drgabriellelyon.com. Cynthia Thurlow, she's a nurse practitioner. She is at CHT_wellness on Instagram. Her website is just her name, Cynthia with a Y, Thurlow. Dr. Terry Walls was back for this one. We've already given her info. And then Lucia Howley, she's an FNTP, a functional nutritional practitioner, and she also has a specialty in intuitive eating. So I think that the MSW, I'm pretty sure that's what that stands for. I never got a chance to ask. So it was the 4 of them. And it was really cool. There's no slides for this one because there weren't any. It was just basically they had each of them talk about what their protocols are, or what kind of their paradigm of nutrition is. Dr. Lyon, they called her muscle nutrition. It was really cool because I have never been at one of these conferences where someone really talked about macros and eating a high protein diet. Super cool. And is she ever passionate about it? Like, oh my goodness. She about jumped out of her chair when someone asked her about a specific doctor who was on Rhonda Patrick's podcast talking about mTOR and ATP and protein protein suppressing and oh
I know
my gosh.
the 5 people that are making it through this episode because they understand this
Right.
stuff would very much understand.
They'll understand this.
Yeah.
So her paradigm basically is that she really believes in high protein diet, high protein boluses
But
essentially.
Amy, protein leads to more mTOR activity.
And that will decrease aging. So that was a study in rats.
And that you will die.
Yep. Nope. You will
Along
not.
with your last breath with your stem cells, all the negative things you talk about.
You
And
know
then,
what
by the
will
way,
kill
the
you, though?
sleeping's killing you too.
Sarcopenia will kill you.
Yeah, exactly.
So your rates of death when you enter the hospital, the amount of sarcopenia you have is directly correlated if you live.
Of course it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
So if that's the case, if we're all supposed to not eat and not activate mTOR or not, be the opposite of mTOR, then we should all sit and sleep in deprivation tanks and never move again.
exactly.
Yeah.
And live a really flat life.
Right.
So
It's just dumb. It's so inane. It's like, I understand this is not our specialty, but just being a logical person. I mean, do you want to be 70 and have muscle mass and functionality? Or do you want to be 70 and like extremely skinny and frail
Yep.
with osteoporosis?
Yep.
Like, I don't get it. Like, that's the thing. And by the way, longevity research is really heating up right now because of investments from the private sector. And there will be answers in the next 10, 15, 20 years that will, like senolytics or whatever they call that, like the different types of therapies, stem cell therapies when they actually figure it out, which they haven't yet, that will extend our life. And when that time comes, you better hope you have a lot of muscle, right? Because you don't want to be 75 extremely skinny, and all of a sudden you're going to live another 30 years with having no quality of life, assuming you don't have a traumatic injury or cancer.
right. In a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Sorry for my soapbox.
No, it's okay. So her thing too, she talks about muscle as an organ. So she says it's the largest anti-aging
Everything's an
organ we
organ.
have.
Skin's an organ. Fat's an organ, according to you, and now muscle's an organ.
That's according to her. So that was kind of her spiel. So she's high protein, believes in eating at least 30 grams of protein per feeding, essentially. It was really interesting. Cynthia Thurlow, she's a nurse practitioner. She really talks a lot about intermittent fasting. And this was an interesting conversation because intermittent fasting is kind of like the buzzy thing right now.
Get your IF on.
Yeah. And she didn't, obviously, again, we're all nutritional therapists. We all know a lot about this. So she didn't talk a lot about that, but that's really what she was, her thing is intermittent fasting. Dr. Walls obviously was talking about keto. We talked more than anything in this about who shouldn't be doing keto. Again, and that was one thing I didn't bring up in her talk. I had it in my notes, but I didn't look at them. There is a certain condition that every time they've tried studying it with keto diets, they've had to end them because of the extreme, degradation in a person's health. ALS. So ALS, she said she said literally anyone who is utilizing ALS or keto with ALS is malpractice. She literally said that. So if you, absolutely there are people who should not be doing keto. And she was the first one to say that, which was interesting.
Which is devastating because Lou Gehrig's disease, they have a,
Right.
it's maybe a couple years and then,
and it's so, your health
deteriorates
so fast.
If you did something to make that worse in the limited time you have on this earth, once you get that diagnosis, it would be pretty devastating.
Yeah. And every time they've tried multiple times apparently to study different types of ketogenic approps with these people, and they have to end them almost immediately.
So interesting.
Yeah. Isn't that weird? It just makes you then wonder wow, why? What's the mechanism essentially that's causing that downturn in somebody's health with ALS? And like you said, there's such a short time period anyway. And then Lucia was really cool. She talked about intuitive eating, and I would have loved to hear her talk more because I really feel like this is something that we have become really detached from as a society, is intuition in general.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I think people have a lot of intuition, but then when you get on social media and you talk about religion or nutrition, it's like people lose their intuition and they just get into the tribal camps. So I'm keto and that's what I do because that's what everyone's doing, or I'm low carb or whatever, Yeah. I have what does everyone have now? They have the allergy, the gluten allergy.
Yeah.
Well, you really don't have a gluten allergy. I know, but that's what's, I'm going to lose weight, so I'm going to cut out gluten. Okay.
Yeah, people love, and there's a great book called Diet Cults.
Yeah, it's not even intuitive.
No,
it's not.
It's not, and that's really I think a lot of the issues with eating disorders in our society nowadays are from people's lack of intuition around eating and about feeding their children and about eating in general. Even things like, thinking that it's okay to eat all of your food out of a package. Is that intuitive? Is that what your primal brain recognizes as food? No. So intuition goes pretty deep. So this was...
I would actually argue intuition is probably the best because nutrition is very confusing. Even talking to you and being a board certified physician, sometimes I get lost. And I'm pretty good with this stuff.
Yeah.
So you imagine like the layperson, it's just like so confusing. You can't even have these kind of conversations with them.
See, it's not confusing. It's very simple. Like, if your great-great-grandparents would have recognized that item as food, it's probably okay to eat.
Gotcha.
I mean, it could be as simple as that.
Even when you're from Kentucky and the things they consider food are basically butter and fat?
Yeah. Butter's fine.
Okay.
What else do they consider food? Do they consider Pop-Tarts food?
No.
They consider butter food?
Yeah.
Butter's good.
I was joking with someone. I've said this to you before. I was joking, but like in the South, they have something called succotash.
Oh, I love succotash.
Which is basically they take whatever is in the field.
Yes.
And
Lima beans,
and
corn,
they put it in a big pot and they
onions.
put butter in it and then like saute it. That's succotash basically. Whatever at that time was like, harvesting. And yeah, they've been doing that for like 200 years. I mean, because that's what you do when you're poor. You just take the stuff from the field and you whatever. And you come to Colorado and everyone's like, it's farm to table. It's like ingredients from the land that come to the table.
That's like, literally the way people
what
eat.
do you think has been happening on this earth? I mean, this is so dumb. You're like espousing the fact that you took stuff from the land and you're actually putting it on the table.
Right.
Well, that's what we've been doing.
Well,
it's just not processed.
You're kind of honoring your food and actually eating. Yeah. So Clinical Pearls was just case studies. So this is just geeky nutrition stuff. So we looked at a lot of case studies. Here's kind of just this is kind of how we prioritize things with the NAC and with our client concerns. So it was really cool. One of them, this first one, keto gone wrong. People tend to think they can just keto harder and that'll fix things. That was kind of interesting to talk about. And then one of the women who presented a case study of she just kept calling her a fellow like wellness practitioner. She didn't say what she was, but this woman, that was interesting too, because it kind of challenges you to kind of look at yourself a little bit. And people get very hung up on their challenges, right? They almost become like, wear them as like a badge, like, oh, well, I'm celiac and I'm this and I'm that. And like, they kind of build up this story of who they are nutritionally, and it can really hold a person back from actually getting better. And especially sometimes the more the more you think you have SIBO and celiac and everything else. So that was really interesting too, just from a practitioner standpoint, to hear these studies and kind of be able to reflect. So this was a really cool presentation. This was Katie Norris. Her presentation was called Nutrition for Dementia. Her Instagram is @Recourse Coaching, and her website is recoursecoaching.com. I didn't know what to expect. I kind of thought we were going to be talking about nutrition for dementia, which we did, but we really talked more about caretaking for people with dementia.
The caretaker or caring for someone with
caring
dementia?
for someone with dementia. So one of the challenges, obviously, with people who end up having dementia is their ability to be self-sufficient. And eating can kind of go into that. Like they don't know how to say what they want to eat. And a lot of that is because they lose the ability to vocalize, but they don't lose the ability necessarily to think, which I thought was really cool. One of the really neat things, I mean, she showed so many cool pictures and slides I didn't get pictures of because I was just so like caught up in this presentation, is ways to help people with dementia be more autonomous, like by really kind of drawing stuff out. The other thing that can happen is they can have difficulty with reading or with reading sizes and certain types of fonts.
Oh, I've seen this. And they have difficulties with shapes and textures.
Yeah.
I've seen it firsthand in our family.
So it was really cool. Like she'd show like how you could put like diagrams, and like as people progress in their dementia, like it might need to become more and more detailed. The thing that I found the most fascinating with this, and I actually did get to ask her this question, is the reading comprehension stays very, very long into the progression of disease. So even if a person cannot vocalize responses or really even do the thing that they want, like they can read and understand that for a very long time. So as their disease progresses, so really that's a great way to communicate with people who have dementia is through writing, which you wouldn't really intuitively think. But that's a great way to communicate with them. So it was really, really cool and just such a neat thing to kind of talk about. Like I things I'd never really thought about. Like it really gave a lot of like the word I'm thinking for, like helping someone, like honoring their condition essentially. Yeah. Like helping them feel like a person, helping them feel a part of the process. And
that's great for caretakers. We just put on Instagram National Caretaker Day, and it's a tough job and you don't get enough thanks. So I mean, finding ways to help them cleverly improve the nutrition for these people with dementia is really good. Yeah.
And helping them be kind of in charge of that too, in a way that gives them some feeling of like self-worth, instead of just like trying to like force feed them the foods that you think are good for them, trying to kind of figure out ways to get them involved in the process. So it was really cool. So that was really cool. The last presentation of the day on Saturday was Dr. Anna Marie Cabeca. Quebeca. I had read her book, which I didn't realize until
The Hormone Fix.
they showed it. Yeah, I've read The Hormone Fix. She has a new book coming out, I think, again in March of 2020 called Keto Green 16. She can be found on Instagram at Dr. Anna Quebeca, which is Cabeca, and her website is just Dr. Anna Quebeca as well. So it was really interesting because her presentation was called Keeping Balance with the Keto Green Way, but that's really not what she talked about. She really talked about women's hormones. She's an OBGYN. Really, really interesting. She talked a lot about the hormone shift over time, why we become estrogen dominant, kind of the fall off of hormones just in general. It was really, really interesting, especially for anyone who is a woman, was really interesting. A lot of the things that happen during peri and menopause, as your hormones are dropping off, fatigue, like it's kind of just there's a lot of things that happen that are really not talked about. It's as being anything that's not normal. Like a lot of these symptoms are kind of brushed away as being like just part of this change, and they really shouldn't be. They can be managed essentially through diet and also through some bioidentical hormone replacement, but they don't need to happen. And like you can maintain your hormones at a healthy level and not just have them completely drop off.
So if we're focusing on our mitochondria, we're going to increase our longevity, and for women and men both. If we're going to live longer, from an evolutionary standpoint, the hormones didn't matter after 20 or 30 years old because you've already procreated, and then
your usefulness to the human species at that moment was
you're
pretty much
supposed to
done.
go away.
Yeah,
you've
done your job. You've done your job.
You're done.
Yeah, it's true, and that really is part of it.
I think if you think it like that, if you just take a step back, like it kind of makes sense for hormone replacement. Now, there's so many things about hormone replacement that concern people, and some of those are warranted. Breast cancer, if you have a family history of breast cancer, you have to think twice about that. But the benefits of hormone replacement, per the data, far outweigh the contraindications or the bad parts. And so, yeah, it may not be right for everyone, but most people would benefit from at least nutritionally supporting your hormones and maybe considering bioidenticals.
We focused on how you can through nutritional help kind of stop these processes from being as bad. Switching how your body processes things. She's obviously big on keto, but she's big on this keto green, which is kind of her theory about keto that's a little more cyclical. It's probably not like straight keto, really, but changing the way your body processes glucose essentially is going to help. And it does. I mean, when you look at a postmenopausal woman, like as your body stops producing estrogen in your ovaries, you start producing it in your adrenal glands. Well, what else happens with your adrenals? Your adrenals control your blood sugars for a large part. So if you're overtaxing your adrenal glands postmenopausal with glucose dysregulation, your estrogen levels are going to further continue to suffer as well. So there's definitely a lot nutritionally that can help with some of these things. And that was really her presentation was mostly, like I said, about kind of hormones and how they drop off as you age and kind of how nutritional interventions can help. She sells a topical cream that I found really interesting. So it's a topical DHEA that women rub like on their clitoris and helps with kind of keeping those tissues healthy as they age.
Usually it's an estrogen cream when they go down.
And that's one of the things she talked about, how that's historically what's used, but that's really not what's needed. So it's a progesterone DHEA cream. Oh. Yeah, super cool. So if you're at all interested, I would highly recommend looking her up. She was really, really cool.
Yeah, you love The Hormone Fix.
I do.
That was a really good book.
Really good book.
We talked about that.
Yep. And I actually told her, I'm like, when I went, I took her book with me when I went to see a hormone specialist, was like reading it in his office, like super quick, like, all right, what's he going to say? Like, is it going to match up with what she says? So it was pretty cool. So
You're trolling our hormone doctor?
Well, I had the book with me. I would have shown it to him.
Okay.
So she was super great. And if you're interested in healthy hormones as you age, I would definitely recommend checking out her book and her Instagram and everything. She had her daughters there too. It was super sweet. She has 4 girls. Really fun story. And they were wearing, oh my gosh, her daughters they looked like old school flight attendants, like in the Pan Am days. They were wearing these like magenta pantsuits with like little capris and little heels. They were so cute. It was really fun. So this was a really cool presentation. Anyone who is in the fitness industry is probably going to immediately recognize this name of Tosca Reno. It is definitely a name that stands out. So Tosca, her presentation was titled "The Science of Bouncing Back, Survive and Thrive in the Wellness Industry," which I guess that was kind of what it was about. Her story more than anything was really about her journey. It wasn't really anything directly related to nutrition. It was really just about her journey. She can be found on Instagram at Toscarino. Her website is also Toscarino. She has many books. Primarily the one that I knew her from and that most people would probably recognize was the Butt book. The Clean Eating Diet had the Clean Eating Diet and then like thousands of iterations. The Clean Eating Diet for Men, the Clean Eating Diet cookbook. She had tons of those. She also had the Start Here Diet and Your Best Body Now. So why would she be someone that anyone at a nutritional conference would want to listen to? She is a bikini competitor. She's Canadian, right? Because she had a great story. She actually was very overweight. She was well over 200 pounds, had kids, bad divorce, blah, blah, blah. Typical story, stress, life. Started working out, started changing her diet, lost a ton of weight, went on to be a bikini competitor. Did very, very well in the bikini circuit, married this guy who was her trainer. He was also a publisher, published all these books, and then it all kind of like came crashing down around her again. And really what she talked a lot about was just how to overcome obstacles. She had this great Zen proverb that said, obstacles don't block the path, they are the path. And it was really about how to like reinvent yourself and bounce back. And I'm going to look at my notes because there weren't a lot of slides, but there were definitely some things that she said that were super cool. Where's Tosca? There she is.
A lot of these fitness and physique people had that kind of history. Paul had that. Kate Cavers, our coach, had that, in terms of obesity. They've struggled with their bodies. And
Paul and Kate were never obese.
Paul was skinny. I mean, that's my point was they all had their issues they dealt with and they tried to overcome it physically. And they turned to these, this outlet, this competitive outlet to do that.
Yeah. And that's not really that was just kind of part of her story. Her story was more like how you crash down from that and come back. Facts, one of the things she said was facts tell, stories sell. So you should never stop reinventing yourself. Like you kind of need to like build your own narrative, paint a picture of your future self, have a definitive purpose statement, really talking about how to be your best self. She was also the one that tried to get us all to hug, which I told Nils I declined from joining in on. But 7-second hug.
I'll hug someone if they're like 10 feet away with a mask on.
Right. So yeah, this is
and I have eye protection.
Right. Topically interesting right now. But talking about your community, I had to step out because I started coughing when she was talking about social media, which I was super interested to hear because she was talking about like the connections that you make. She's like, any person who like follows you on social media or reaches out to you, like you should immediately try and make that like an in-person connection because those are the connections that are going to last. And like, those are the connections that are meaningful, that will really help build your brand, that are really actually helpful in the real life. So it was very interesting. That's really most of what it was. It was more about
her life
than anything else, but still super cool. And if you're, wanting some motivation, her website's super cool. She has a lot of great articles. She's Canadian. She said this to everybody, like she loves the poop emoji. And yes, she does. It is all over her website. She said that in this presentation. I was looking at her website. I'm like, oh my gosh, she does love the poop emoji. Poop emoji. Yeah. So the final presentation that I was able to stay for was by Tamara Carr. She's a PhD. Talking about traditional diets beyond the Paleolithic model. Her website is yourwholenutrition.com and her book is Our Journey with Food. I didn't really know what to expect from this. I really thought she was going to be talking about, the quote unquote paleo diet. Right? There are a lot of books like The Paleo Way. Like there's tons of recent books like within the last 20 years about paleo diets. It's also a very cultish kind of, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean like people really attached to like, I am paleo. I don't eat grains. Like I am eating the way my ancestors ate.
Right.
But what does that mean? Right? Like who knows? So she actually studies anthropology and
like looks at their teeth and stuff like that. Yeah.
So it was super cool. So this was pretty much a deep dive into anthropology and archaeology that I was also not expecting. There actually is. So this is something that is being studied now. So archaeology and cultural anthropology provides a perspective on what actual Paleolithic diets were like. There's food archaeology that shows that just because a food is present today does not mean it was eaten or available to past peoples, and vice versa. Like we all kind of think that we can eat paleo today, and it literally means nothing. Culinary archaeology is the study of food preparation utensils, which is what she, is really passionate about. They have found in all of these sites from around the world, many, many sites from up to 14,000 years ago, that they were baking bread.
Oh my God. So 14,000 years ago when the pre-humans were eating bread, did they all have gluten allergies?
They did not.
And waste away?
They didn't. And, we used to think, and that's what's so funny with
all due deference to people that have a true gluten allergy, which is celiac disease, which is like horrific.
It's real.
Okay, sorry.
It's rare. It's real.
Sorry for the joke if you have that.
Yeah, but they found evidence. That's the oldest evidence they found of people like baking and consuming bread, like that they were cooking grains in bread. So we're traditional meets science. So you have to still look at the bio-individual nutrition, meaning where this culture was. It still matters. And like the whole food dietary approach is specific to you, your genetics, your family history, your lifestyle, your sex, your age, and your cultural preferences. And that's why there will never be one diet for all of humanity that is appropriate to all of humanity, because we didn't all come from the same place. You know, as people spread out throughout the world, they were eating different foods and foods that were available to them when they were available to them.
Yeah, what's the tribe, we've talked about this before, in Africa that only eats meat and like fermented milk?
Yeah.
Like that's all they eat.
And blood. They eat a lot of blood.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They consume a lot of blood.
I forget the name of the tribe.
Yeah.
But like, and they're extremely healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yep, super healthy. And then you take the Inuits up in Alaska and the Arctic regions.
They just eat blubber and fat.
Seal fat and berries.
Yeah.
You know, they're eating like seal fat and berries. So many diets, as we kind of touched on earlier.
So the irony, or not the irony, the joke of all this is like paleo is, one paleo is not the same as another paleo.
Correct.
Right.
And it's the same reason today that one diet is not appropriate for everyone. So there are significant differences between how food interacts with people, like biologically, like on the cellular level. Like certain foods are definitely going to jive with certain people more. Now, we have definitely mixed our genome a lot in the last few centuries, but these things still do matter. They talk specifically about our epigenetics via sperm, and that's something that is still so not talked about in reproductive issues and infertility, that like the man's contribution to this person, this genome that's being made, has an epigenetic role just like anything else. So the things that were affecting his life are going to affect his offspring's life. Stress, dietary struggles, they all matter. Like it's a trickle-down effect. That was, I had to step out of hers because she went so far over. Like she was going like 20 minutes over and I had to catch a plane. So I'm like, I gotta go.
That's too bad.
So how she wrapped it up, I don't know. But her point was really well taken, that as nutritional therapists, we still need to be looking at the bio-individuality of the people in front of us. Mm-hmm. There is no one paleo diet.
Which is that knack. Can you tell people about the knack?
Yeah.
That's how you find out what's going on.
You do. The knack, nutritional interviews, talking to a person about their heritage. Like, where are your people from? You know, are you sub-Saharan African? Like, you know, are your people from Russia?
I have no idea with me.
So,
we've been in America like since the 1700s. I mean, God knows.
So
I'd have to. No, I've never done the genetic test.
But like, you don't even know from like your parents' history? Like,
I mean, it's like, you know, Western European, like, you know, it's French, German, that kind of stuff.
I'm strongly German. My grandmother's maiden name was Kaiser. Like I'm like pretty much all German with a little Irish and a little mutt.
I knew it. I could tell.
Yeah. So, but those things matter, you know. So like, why do I love sauerkraut? Like maybe that's why. You know, you have to address the whole person. So my takeaways from the conference really were that, like, honoring the ritual, and I mean the ritual of like your person. This is one thing I did not bring up, but every single presenter, maybe except for the Paleolithic chick, she didn't. Everyone else talked about meditation. Every single one.
The M word. You had to end on that too.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm working on the sleep, so the next thing is M.
Meditation might help. So, do you have any questions?
No. I mean, this is tons of information.
See why I didn't want to talk to you about it? Because I didn't want to ruin anything.
It's almost too much information,
Yes.
but like we went through so many good things here. Mitochondrial health, sleep, hormones, paleo, keto, and it's really nice to see that the keto advocate was trying to apply some restraint to that diet. Mm-hmm. Neurodegenerative diseases and what you can do nutritionally speaking. So there's so many different things we talked about.
Yeah, it was really, I was super impressed.
And Reiki,
energy
your
healing,
on?
your Biofield. Nils has given us some Reiki from afar.
I'm like touching, not
Right.
touching,
You're
but
not,
I have
this
my
is
hands
non-touch therapy right here.
over
in my
Amy.
Biofield. You're totally in my Biofield.
I know, but if I put my hands in front of your eyes, that's kind of distracting, but I'm passing energy through your eyes, which you may not know is the best way to pass the energy through.
Through the eyes?
Yeah.
I think it is. Eyes are the window to your soul.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you, everyone, for listening. I know this was a long podcast, but I found it a super fascinating convention, and I really appreciate that you guys would come along to listen to what I have to say. If you are interested in seeing the slides and the video from this podcast, you can be found on YouTube at Jason Martin MD.
I think one of the best parts of this presentation is that you gave the links to the people that presented at this conference.
So you can
So
find out
it's like
more.
for anybody who wants to know about it, I would just highly advise you to go to these different websites.
Yeah, they were super great. So be sure to follow us, give us a like, comment, rating, review. We do love questions. I've been trying to put together enough questions to do like an Ask Us Anything or a Q&A. So if you have any thoughts or questions for an Ask Us Anything, please ask us anything. We would love to hear your questions. Please leave us feedback. We super appreciate 5-star ratings and reviews as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.